잠깐만요.
She folded it up and put it in her pocket. Caitlin said nothing, and after that, she just walked over to the couch, sat down, and continued watching the movie. So when Caitlin's parents got home, Mia pulled them aside and told them what happened, and she even showed them the picture that Caitlin drew with the purple crayon. And the creepy thing was, the parents didn't even seem surprised whatsoever. Instead, they just shook their head and told Mia that that's what they were worried about. Apparently, their daughter had been randomly drawing what she called the purple man for the past 6 months, and she claims that this purple man would constantly visit her. And she just went into this trance whenever she saw him and would immediately start drawing him. Maybe it was to prove he was there, or maybe the purple man was like forcing her into this trance to draw him, which is almost creepier. So Mia babysat her 2 more times, but because it kept happening, she decided to stop going to their house because she was honestly just too spooked. And apparently she still thinks about that little girl to this day, and she has no idea if she's still seeing this purple man, if she's still drawing this purple man. And yeah, I was just so shocked when I saw this girl's DM. And whether it's just a creepypasta she wrote or something she actually experienced, it's still super spooky, and I don't even know what I would do if I was in that situation. And you guys know I've had some pretty crazy babysitting stories, but this one tops it. So because I was so fascinated with this whole purple man creature, I decided to go online and research to see if he appears anywhere else in history, in folklore, in creepypastas. Have other kids been seeing him? And the answer is yes. I actually found a lot of people who had claimed to see this purple man in their lives. And I also found like a lot of pages on Five Nights at Freddy's. I guess there's like a purple man character in the game. I'm sorry, I wouldn't know. I don't play. I'm sorry. But I found another story about a boy that complained to his parents about seeing the purple man at his school. He said that whenever he went to his locker in the morning and would look down the hall, he would see a tall purple man with white eyes and a long open mouth just staring at him. And none of the other kids in the hallway would see this purple man. They would just pass by him as if nothing was wrong. Some people would even walk through him. So just showing that he's an apparition of some sort. And this happened for months, and it got to the point where this poor boy didn't want to go to the locker hallway anymore. So he just carried all of his books and his coats with him everywhere, which would be so awful. The neighbors. This story is about a family that lived in a large house
It's
in a beautiful
scary.
neighborhood, and everyone that lived there was friendly and
Ooh.
happy, and it was only a 3-minute walk from their daughter's school. Their daughter's name was Emily, and as you can expect from one of these videos, yes, she loved to draw. One day they saw that their longtime neighbors put up a for sale sign, and they were really disappointed because they had lived beside them for 10 plus years, and they had become quite close. And after they left, a new family of 4 moved in. It was 2 older adults with 2 sons that looked to be in their mid-20s. This family seemed very reserved, and they almost never left their house. One time, Emily and her parents went over there with a welcome basket and rang the doorbell, but they didn't open the door, and instead they just stared at them through the windows. Could you imagine? After a few weeks, Emily was sitting at the table drawing, and her mother walked up to see what she made. She had drawn their 4 neighbors using a bunch of different crayon colors, but on the far right side of the page, far away from the neighbors that she drew another person, only she just used the pink crayon. Her mother asked who that pink person was, and Emily just shrugged. This went on for a while because Emily loved drawing things from her neighborhood. She loved to people watch, as they say. So if she
I'm
saw
gonna
neighbors
delete
just
some
joining
stuff.
in, she would draw them doing that. But there would always
Wink,
be that
wink.
extra person on the far
Nobody
right
that
side
looked
of the
like Kim
page
had
always
gotten to the
drawing
harbor
the
that
pink.
night.
One day,
On
Emily and
top
her
of that,
mother
there
were
were no
walking
eyewitnesses of Kim that night, which is huge. She was all over the news in Denmark at this point. I mean, this was like the biggest story of that time. I mean, surely someone would have come forward if they saw her. The search for Kim continues, but instead of looking near the harbor, now the authorities kind of start searching in the waters. Their concern was, what if Kim is still in the sub? There could be an air pocket and she could still be alive and we have to get her. The Navy sent divers down, and much of the sub was flooded
Need
with
a
water
second.
since
Hold
the
on.
hatch was left open by Madsen deliberately. And they start going to all the windows, peering in. There were no survivors that they could see. Additionally, it did not seem feasible or safe for them to go inside. So, just to make the timeline more clear, August 10th, that night, August 10th, like 7:30, they get onto the sub. That morning, August 11th, Madsen is found and the submarine sinks. Not a single trace of Kim. The very next day, August 12th, Madsen is arrested and he appears in court. And this is like a preliminary hearing. He's not even technically really charged. His story wasn't adding up. There were just pretty big holes in his story, so it didn't make sense. August 13th.
Ed roommate. Now he's lying about Dave Cologne.
Dave was a prosecutor who fought crime. He helped lock up an Al Qaeda terrorist.
Police like me.
Like me, trust Dave because of his experience.
13th, the authorities start lifting the submarine out of the water. Their plan was to get one of those giant, almost like cargo ships, like Navy ships, lift the sub up with these giant cranes that are on the ship in hopes that it won't snap in half, bring it to the harbor where they would drain the water, I think like 9,000 gallons of water, and start searching the inside. That was the first real evidence that their suspicions were not unfounded. Kim was not in the submarine, but everything was a mess. Authorities reported finding what looked like pieces of flesh in the boat, in the sub. And there was still some water that didn't fully drain, and it had come up to their blue suits. They touched it, and when they got out, one of the naval commanders, they just had this weird feeling. And they sniffed it. It smelled very strongly of blood, and yes, it's a steel submarine, and some people think that blood has a metallic scent, which it does, but the naval commander is saying, no, when you're talking about blood in water that's been kind of diluted in water, it's a very specific smell, and we know that smell. They also found her jacket still in the submarine, which, why would anyone leave that? If she had been brought ashore to any harbor, right, not that one, because clearly there's no footage of her there, but harbor, she would have taken her things with her. She is not a careless woman. Why would she leave her jacket? She had like tickets, train tickets in the jacket still that needed to be used. Why would she do that? But it still doesn't get authorities closer to finding Kim. And right now, the whole world seemed to be talking about this incident like they were the Titan. Was this a rescue mission or is it going to be a recovery mission? What's going on? Kim's parents came out to state that they were heartbroken over what was going on. And they said, and I quote, Kim has worked in many dangerous places as her work as a journalist, and there have been many times we were worried about her. That something could have happened in Copenhagen, just a stone's throw away from her childhood home, is something we could have never imagined.
Fine, I said fine.
Over 10 days later, everyone's worst fears were confirmed. There was a flurry of police activity near the shore, which is not normal in Copenhagen. Media, civilians, everyone waited for a press conference, and everyone's thinking the same thing, but they didn't want to say it out loud. They believed that they found her body, but it was so much worse. They found a woman's torso, without her legs, without her arms, and without her head. Just a torso. It was clearly from manual dismemberment from another human and not ocean life. Authorities stated they do need to do DNA testing, but this is not really common in Copenhagen, so people thought, what are the odds it's not her? The results would show that it was in fact Kim Wall's torso. And this changed everything, including Peter Madsen's story. Peter Madsen said, you know what, you're right, I didn't drop Kim off. I was too nervous to tell you guys the truth from the get-go. According to his news story, he was opening up the hatch on the sub, which you would imagine is very, very heavy because you can't let any of that water come in when you're completely submerged. It's like this giant bolted steel plate, and then you gotta push it open so that you can get out once you're above water. He had to hold it up so that they could get through the hatch and get out, but he lost his grip, and he said this giant steel hatch came crashing down on Kim as she was trying to leave the tower, so it hit her in the head, knocked her out, she fell down, and she was dead.
Wait, this is when they're trying to leave?
Yeah.
Not okay.
Yeah.
What?
So he said he knew it. He was so panicked. He felt awful, just horrible. And as someone who has been at sea for a while, he stated, he didn't know what else to do but give her a funeral at sea. So he threw her body overboard. His story conveniently leaves out the part that she was dismembered and the fact that her torso showed evidence of torture. There were markings on her torso that looked inflicted wounds, yeah, torture wounds, as well as many stab wounds on her private areas were also found. So the authorities did not believe him, and it was scary that a killer could just stare them in the eyes and lie like that. I mean, to think that they would just believe it and send him home, like they had no idea what kind of monster they were working with. So they were determined to prove it. In order to build a case against him, they would have to explain how Kim died. Otherwise, a court would have a very hard time convicting him of murder. And the best way to prove it is to find Kim's body. Finding her head would be crucial in closure for families, but also for justice. If investigators could prove that she had no fractures or blood force trauma to the head, his entire story would be debunked. But finding parts of her body in Crew Bay, nearly impossible. They said it's the equivalent of, do you know how big a football field is, right? Think about 10 football fields. Someone flies over in a helicopter and drops a quarter. Go look for that quarter. Yeah, that's how hard it was. And every day was even harder because the body parts would move because of the water current. So they had to bring in an oceanographer who was at his whole life. All he did was study how things move in water. He would have to map out, okay, today we have to search this area because if there was anything dropped at this area, it would have moved to this area. But then if it was dropped at this area, it would move to this. It was so complicated. And on top of that, let me explain. If you were in this giant room, not this room is not giant, but like if you were in a giant room, you could see 10 feet ahead, 20 feet ahead if there's nothing blocking your field of vision. You could probably see the end of a stadium or a giant ballroom. In the water, you see like a book's length away, or at least this water. That's all you see, the rest is murky. So you can't just go in there and scan an area with your eyes and then be like, okay, like I scanned 100 feet. It's huge. It's looking for a tiny, tiny piece in a giant ocean. October 6th, 56 days of search, 50 divers a day. There are about 3,500 dive times recorded, 200 acres of area covered, with the calculation of water movement. In the end, the police found Kim's legs and her severed head.
No way.
Yeah, and it showed that she had no traces of blunt force trauma or fractures. Peter's second story was a lie. And it was clear, with the evidence of the stab wounds, the prosecutors believed he took Kim down into the sub, trapped her in there, isolated her from the world, basically buried her with her own killer, and sadistically tortured her, killed her, and dismembered her. All because she was a woman doing her job. And before you say, well, it could happen to a man, but it didn't. Peter did not ask any men to come into the sub alone. But he did that week ask many women. It seems like he just wanted to kill any woman that week. The first woman that would be alone in the sub with him was the one that he was going to kill. He asked multiple friends, multiple acquaintances, do you want to go into the sub? Some of these friends asked, oh yeah, great, sure, can I bring my kids? And he said no. And that friend said that was really weird because Peter usually is known for wanting a ton of people around him. He loved big, big gatherings, especially the sub. Like he loved taking people down into the sub. So for him to refuse, it felt really off. So she said, maybe not. Like I gotta watch the kids, so I can't go. Now, the police searched through Peter's phone and his computer, which, side note, Peter really did not want to give them access to his computer. He kept screaming that he had trade and business secrets on there that the police were trying to steal. It was a huge ordeal, but they had a forensic expert try and get all the data from his device.